Welcome to World Revolution Channel. Today, we present the book summary of Moneyball, The Art of Winning an Unfair Game by Michael Lewis.
That's right.
Have you ever wondered how the poorest baseball team in the league beat the mega rich? I mean, it sounds impossible.
It does. It really does.
In Michael Lewis's book, Moneyball, we dive into the true story of Billy Beane, the Oakland Athletics manager who, well, he revolutionized the sport with data and statistics instead of relying on old-fashioned instincts.
And that's the core of it right there. Data versus instinct.
And so if you want to know how intelligence can beat money, don't miss this deep dive. It might just change the way you think about running a team or even a business. Can it really be done? Let's get into it.
It can, and that's exactly the question we're going to unpack today. This is a story that, it goes so far beyond just sports.
Right.
This deep dive is all about the intellectual revolution that took place in Major League Baseball, all centered on the Oakland A's and their general manager, Billy Beane. We're really going to shortcut your understanding of how to win what is fundamentally an unfair game.
And the premise, especially back then in the early 2000s, was just shocking. I mean, how did one of the absolute poorest teams in Major League Baseball consistently beat teams like the New York Yankees?
The Yankees, who had, just vastly superior financial resources, it wasn't even close.
We're looking at a system where everyone, from the owners to the agents to the guys in the stands, argued the game had stopped being an athletic competition. They said it had just become a financial one.
That was the prevailing argument. You had to buy your wins. If you were a small market team like Oakland, you were basically doomed. You were just there to make up the numbers.
So to really get the genius of what the A's did, you have to first understand the sheer scale of the financial hole they were in.
The context is absolutely crucial. So let's talk about that 2002 season.
Give us the numbers. What kind of chasm are we talking about here?
Okay, so at the very top, you have the richest team, the New York Yankees. Their payroll was $126 million.
Wow, 126.
A massive figure. It's designed to buy instant guaranteed success. Now, you look at the bottom of the league. The two poorest teams, the Oakland A's and the Tampa Bay Devil Rays.
Okay.
Their payrolls were less than a third of that. They were sitting at around $40 million.
Less than a third. So the Yankees could afford to pay, what, 3 different star players more than Oakland was paying their entire 25-man roster.
Exactly. It's not a level playing field. It's not even the same game. It's fundamentally tilted.
And that explains the conventional wisdom then.
Yeah.
The accepted truth among all the baseball professionals was that poor teams were, and I think this is a quote, almost certain to fail.
Almost certain. The belief was that success was simply bought. Baseball had become this pure expression of financial power in American sports.
But the truly remarkable thing, and the whole reason we're talking about this book, is that Oakland had already been succeeding, despite this huge constraint. They'd found a budget hack. They fundamentally changed the nature of the contest from one of just sheer wealth to one of superior efficiency.
They proved that winning still depends less on how much money you have and way, way more on how well you spend it. And they proved it definitively in the years leading right up to that 2002 crisis.
Let's detail that because it's so important to show this wasn't just some one-year fluke.
Right. So in 2000, the A's spent a mere $26 million on their payroll.
$26 million.
And yet they racked up 91 wins and won their division title. Then in 2001, with a $34 million payroll, still, laughably tiny compared to the Yankees, they achieved an astonishing 102 wins.
102 wins.
They were, in fact, the winningest team in all of baseball between 1999 and 2002.
Wait, hold on. The team that was supposed to be certain to fail was actually the most successful team over a 4-year stretch.
Yes.
That's almost impossible to reconcile with the whole narrative that money buys wins.
It forces a massive shift in how you think about it. And this is where the work of financial analysts, specifically a guy named Doug Pappas, came in to really quantify this efficiency.
So how did Pappas redefine success? What was his method?
Pappas was the one who put a rigorous financial lens on baseball. He established a minimum operational cost for any major league team, about $7 million for the whole roster and staff.
Right, a baseline.
A baseline. And he then calculated that a team operating with just minimum wage players and sheer luck, well, they'd still win about 49 games in a 162-game season.
So 49 wins is basically the statistical floor. You get that for just showing up.
Exactly.
So the true measure of management of intellectual power is how much a team pays in what he called marginal dollars for each marginal win over those 49 baseline wins.
That is the definition of financial efficiency in baseball. And when you run that metric, the scale of Oakland's genius, or, maybe the scale of their competitors' idiocy, it just becomes crystal clear.
So what was the number?
Over that 3-year span, the Oakland A's paid about $500,000 per win over the baseline. $500,000.
$500,000 for a major league win?
Right.
That sounds like an absolute bargain.
It was an incredible bargain. Now, contrast that with the organizations that were supposedly managing their unlimited resources wisely. The most profligate rich franchises, think the Baltimore Orioles or the Texas Rangers, teams known for just spending recklessly.
Right.
They paid nearly $3 million for each win.
6 times the price.
Time.
Walk us through the business side of that. If I own a company and my main rival is paying 6 times what I pay for the exact same unit of output.
They're going bankrupt.
They're bankrupt, and I own the market inside of a decade.
Precisely. In any normal industry, a competitor who is 6 times more efficient than you would just crush you. The A's weren't just competitive, they were an economic predator.
So this staggering inefficiency, these rich teams just throwing money at overrated assets, that's the entire basis for the Moneyball revolution.
That's the crack in the system they exploited. The real goal was figuring out how to continuously acquire wins at that $500,000 price point.
And this is where the story gets really interesting. Because in 2002, the A's faced this existential crisis that forced Billy Beane to lean into this efficiency philosophy with just unprecedented rigor. They had to find the absolute cheapest, most controlled labor available because their few valuable stars were about to get incredibly expensive.
And this brings us to the key market inefficiency, the engine of the whole system, which is the exploitation of the amateur draft.
The source material is really sharp on this. It describes the player control system as a, quote, glaring violation of free market principles.
Oh, it is. It's a structure that's completely contrary to a free market. When a team drafts a player, they own his rights for his first 7 minor league years and his first 6 major league years.
13 years?
Potentially. And during this highly controlled period, the team dictates the salary. They are paid, as Lewis puts it, far less than he is worth. He calls it the baseball equivalent of slaves' wages.
So that control period is the only window a poor team like Oakland has to use a true superstar before he hits the open market and can auction his services for millions.
And this is why drafting well is, for the A's, it's life or death. The perfect case study is their pitcher, Barry Zito.
Right.
The A's drafted him in 1999. By 2002, he was the best pitcher in the American League. He won the Cy Young Award, yet they were only paying him $500,000.
Wow.
He was stuck. He was earning millions below the, 10 to 15 million a year he could get instantly as a free agent. The A's knew they could only afford him until 2007. The clock was always ticking.
And the crisis of 2002 wasn't some far-off threat. It was immediate. They lost their entire offensive engine.
A devastating simultaneous loss. They lost 3 top free agents. First, Jason Giambi, the reigning MVP candidate who signed with the Yankees for $120 million.
Of course, the Yankees.
Then Johnny Damon, their dynamic center fielder, he went to the Red Sox. And their closer, Jason Isringhausen, signed with the Cardinals.
The combined annual salary of just those 3 guys, $33 million, was only $5 million less than the entire Oakland team's payroll for the rest of the year.
It's an almost irreplaceable loss of production. It's like losing your entire senior management team and all your top product lines at the exact same moment.
So what was the compensation? What did the league rules give them?
The only compensation was in the draft. The rules granted the A's 7 first-round draft picks, a historical record going all the way back to 1965.
7 first-round picks. So that draft, the 2002 draft, it became the single most important event for the franchise's entire future.
It was everything. Their one chance to restock the pipeline of cheap, controllable talent. And Billy Beane's mandate was just brutal. He said, however we do it, we're never going to be more wrong than the way we did it before.
Meaning they had to abandon the old ways.
Completely. They had to use those picks to exploit market inefficiencies or they were dead. They had to change the fundamental intellectual foundation of how players were evaluated.
Moving away from subjective, gut feel scouting and toward objective proven data.
And this is where we pivot to the intellectual origins of the movement itself, sabermetrics and the arrival of a man named Bill James.
You really can't talk about Moneyball without talking about Bill James.
He is the intellectual foundation of this entire thing, and his origin story really highlights why traditional baseball just dismissed him for so long. He was a complete outsider.
Not a baseball guy.
Not at all. He was a writer who studied economics and literature, and he was working as a night watchman in a Stokely Van Camp pork and beans factory in Kansas. He had zero institutional credibility.
A true self-starter, though.
Yeah.
Driven by this intellectual obsession to understand baseball performance on a deeper level.
Completely. His first book, the 1977 Baseball Abstract, was literally self-published. He photocopied it and stapled it together himself. The production budget was $112.73.
Wow. And how many people bought it?
75 people bought that first edition. He basically created the entire field of baseball statistics as its own language. He was asking questions the industry never bothered to ask because, they thought they already knew all the answers.
And his early work just fundamentally challenged the sacred cows of traditional baseball. Beane's predecessor, Sandy Alderson, he was already starting to incorporate some of these ideas.
That's right. An early pamphlet confirmed one of James's key insights, that fielding is, at most, 5% of the game.
5%. That is a tectonic shift.
It's huge, because if fielding is largely irrelevant, and the difference between a great fielder and an average one is minimal in terms of winning games, then you should focus all your money, or your lack of it, on what truly matters: offense and pitching.
So what did James identify as the core of the game?
James said the most critical number in baseball isn't speed or home runs. It's 3. The 3 outs that define every inning.
That makes such profound, simple sense. Every single thing that happens is an attempt to delay or avoid getting those 3 outs.
And if the goal is to avoid outs, then the most important offensive statistic has to measure the probability of not making an out. And that statistic is on-base percentage, or OBP.
Okay, so for those of us who grew up on batting average, walk us through why OBP is so much more valuable.
Batting average, which is just hits divided by at-bats, it's fatally flawed. Because it completely ignores walks. And a walk is just as valuable as a single in that it puts a runner on base and, crucially, avoids making it out. OBP, on the other hand, is the probability that the batter will reach base, period.
It's a much purer measure.
It's crystal clear. It's the most important isolated offensive statistic because it measures the probability that you will not be another step closer to the end of your inning.
And this directly challenges traditional stats like runs batted in, RBIs, which were, the gold standard for decades.
RBIs are so problematic because they're a contextual statistic. They measure how often a player drives in a run, but that depends entirely on whether his teammates are getting on base in front of him.
It's a team measure, not an individual skill.
Exactly. A great hitter can have a low RBI total if he's batting leadoff or if the guys hitting ahead of him are terrible. It's a measure of opportunity, not pure skill. OBP is pure skill.
Okay, so OBP is key. The source also talks about how other analysts came up with a simplified metric, OPS.
Right. OPS stands for on base plus slugging. It just combines OBP with slugging percentage, which is a good measure of power. OPS became this accepted shorthand because it correlated really strongly with how many runs a team scored.
Got it. And the sabermetricians, they weren't just finding new things to value. They were actively proving that a lot of conventional strategies were actually, dumb.
They were actively proving they were low efficiency. Analysts like Peter Palmer pointed out that conventional strategies that managers still loved, the sacrifice bunt, stolen bases, hit and runs, they were generally self-defeating.
The math just proved they gave up precious outs far too cheaply.
Right.
So if the math proves they don't work, why did professional managers keep using them? That's the real question.
Palmer's theory on this is fascinating, and it's deeply psychological. He said that managers tend to pick a strategy that is least likely to fail rather than pick a strategy that is most efficient.
What's the difference?
They knew the bunt was probably going to fail, but it was the expected move. The fear of failure wasn't a statistical fear. It was the fear of public humiliation. If an aggressive, non-traditional, but mathematically superior move went wrong.
So you looked like an idiot if you tried something new and it failed.
But you were just unlucky if the traditional play failed. It's career preservation.
So the inefficiency in baseball wasn't just intellectual. It was behavioral. It was rooted in tradition and just fear.
Exactly. And this is why John Henry, the new owner of the Boston Red Sox, he got it immediately. He'd made his fortune in the financial markets, and he saw the same idiocies in baseball herd mentality, emotion over data, that he'd exploited for profit in finance.
He said you had to eliminate beliefs and biases and replace them with data to gain an advantage.
A clear, massive advantage.
But for Billy Beane, this wasn't just an abstract financial theory. He had a very personal, emotional, and visceral connection to why traditional baseball thinking was so flawed. His own disastrous career as a player.
This is so critical. Beane's failure provided the emotional context for his later ruthlessness. He was a highly touted prospect in 1980, drafted by the Mets, judged entirely on his physical traits. A great body, strong arm, all the potential in the world. He was the five-tool physical ideal.
The perfect-looking player.
The perfect-looking player. But despite having all the tools, he utterly failed. He hit just .220 in AAA.
And why? What happened?
He was just paralyzed by the pressure and the expectations that came with that potential. His career stats tell this eloquent tale of suffering. He was so afraid of striking out, of looking bad, that he shortened his swing just to make contact, crippling his natural power. He realized he had been on the receiving end of a false idea of what makes a successful baseball player.
The traditional scouts looked at his body and his swagger, and they saw greatness. But his actual performance told a story of deep anxiety and failure.
His trauma was the key. He had zero nostalgic attachment to the old scouting methods because they had completely destroyed him. They misidentified his value. His failure as personal history of being judged incorrectly by the eye was his greatest strength as an executive.
It gave him the willingness to be ruthless.
And to seek a green field as far away from professional baseball as you could get and still be inside the park.
Which brings us to the draft room. This is where the analytical philosophy led by Beane and his assistant, Paul DePodesta, just collided violently with that traditional wisdom in 2002.
Yeah.
This is where the heresy really began.
It was a direct conflict, projection versus performance. The traditional scouts relied on their eye to judge what he might become in 5 years. They actually used the term performance scouting as an insult.
An insult?
Yes. They disdained judging a player purely on what he has done, on his actual college statistics. They wanted the body and the potential, regardless of the results.
And their bias went way beyond just physical talent, right?
Right.
They were obsessed with psychological profiles and this nebulous concept of makeup.
Oh, makeup was the subjective catch-all filter. Their obsession with psych tests was immense. Bad makeup was a death sentence. It could mean anything from legal trouble to just having a difficult personality. They'd use these vague, subjective terms like rockhead or soft.
And the source has this great kind of dark, humorous illustration of this bias with the Phil Milo magnet.
It was almost a ritual. Phil Milo was a former assistant who had offended everyone in the office, and he became the symbol of bad makeup. When a scout judged a player to have poor character, someone would literally reach for this tiny magnetized photo of Milo and stick it on the player's name on the draft board.
A silent condemnation.
A ritualistic condemnation that Beane just completely ignored. For him, it just confirmed that subjectivity and personal bias were ruling all the decisions.
So Beane and DePodesta, they decided to actively ignore these subjective flaws and just prioritize objective measurables, specifically high OBP no matter what.
Performance over projection, every time. When they were discussing a third baseman, Mark Teehan, the scouts dismissed him. He doesn't project power, they said, a traditional requirement for that position.
But Beane pushed back.
Beane insisted, let's forget about positions and just ask, who is the best hitter? He focused on this maxim that good hitters develop power, power hitters don't become good hitters. They just wanted a hitter who understood the strike zone and could draw walks.
This highlights a huge structural inefficiency, which the book calls a fundamental failure of the imagination.
That is the core realization, and it's relevant to any industry. The A's leverage the inability of other teams to envision a certain kind of person doing a certain kind of thing because you've never seen someone who looks like him do it before.
So if a player looked wrong, too short, too slow, too fat, other teams would just rule them out immediately.
Instantly. And when you rule out an entire class of people based on these cosmetic biases, you leave immense value on the table for the one organization willing to look past the surface flaws.
That failure of the imagination was a luxury the rich teams could afford.
But it was a fatal flaw in their valuation model, and it allowed the A's to find all this value where others saw only defects.
Which leads us right into the draft itself. They were literally hunting for the defective talent pool. Players who were objectively valuable, but cosmetically flawed.
Paul DePodesta was very clear on this. To replace the enormous production they lost, the replacements had to be defective for the A's to afford them. He said, there has to be something wrong with them for them to get to us.
So let's talk about some of these oddballs. First, Jeremy Brown, the catcher from Alabama, famous for his size.
Brown was a catcher whose body was, and this is a quote, deemed by all of baseball to be unsuited to the game. He was a legitimate second-round talent based on his skills. His OBP was staggering, but no one else would take him.
So the A's got a bargain.
A huge bargain. They got him to sign for $200,000, about $500,000 less than other second-round picks, because the market so dramatically undervalued him. DePodesta saw it as a steal, noting that his size and his appearance were the exact things that made him available to them.
Then there's the case of Brandt Colomarino, drafted 218th. DePodesta was apparently ecstatic, claiming he might be the best hitter in the country.
And why was the best hitter in the country available so late? Because of subjective, appearance-related flaws. Scouts and coaches complained to Beane that, and I quote, Colomarino has titties.
Seriously.
Seriously. This cosmetic flaw, which is completely irrelevant to the act of hitting a baseball, was enough for every other team to overlook him. DePodesta's job was to filter out that noise and focus purely on the numbers.
That's incredible. So he wasn't excited about the player himself. He was excited about the market inefficiency around the player.
That's it, exactly. He gets excited about a player when he has something about him that causes everyone else to overlook him, and he knows that specific flaw just doesn't matter to the bottom line, which is getting on base.
And this pattern, acquiring the maimed and inept, continued with their major league players. The Scott Hatteberg story is a perfect example of repurposing valuable but physically defective talent.
Hatteberg was a former catcher released by the Red Sox. He got traded to the Rockies, who immediately let him go, deciding his $1.5 million salary was 3 times what he was worth.
Wow.
Because of a damaged throwing arm? He was, functionally, a catcher who couldn't throw, which is the definition of useless in the traditional market.
And what do the A's do?
They signed him 1 minute after his rights expired, solely for his ability to get on base. His OBP was excellent, and they immediately converted him to first base, a position he had never played.
He had to learn from scratch.
From scratch. There are these wonderful anecdotes of him having his wife, Bitsy, hit him ground balls in the offseason just so he could learn the footwork. His patience at the plate, taking walks, working deep counts, that was the asset. And the irony is that the Red Sox, who cut him, actually saw that patience as a deficiency. They wanted aggressive slugging. The A's saw it as the cornerstone of their offense.
So the key insight wasn't to replace a superstar like Jason Giambi with another single player.
No.
It was to replace his total aggregate production with a collection of these undervalued, defective pieces.
That's the core of the genius. The important thing is not to recreate the individual. The important thing is to recreate the aggregate. They replaced one superstar by combining David Justice, Jeremy Giambi Jason's little brother, a high OBP guy who was too slow for other teams, and Scott Hatteberg. All of them were available because the market saw them as fundamentally flawed.
Okay, let's turn to the pitching side of the equation. Pitching is half the game, and the traditional wisdom there was even more entrenched. The A's needed their own analytical revolution for pitching.
Which they found in the form of a man named Voros McCracken.
Another classic outsider.
Another one. An analyst who fanatically studied Bill James and focused on quantifying pitching performance. And his work truly disrupted centuries of conventional baseball wisdom.
Specifically, the assumption that pitchers control everything that happens once the ball leaves their hand.
Exactly. What McCracken discovered was the limits of a pitcher's control. He found that pitchers have year-to-year predictability in only 3 key areas: strikeouts, walks, and home runs given up.
So only the outcomes that prevent the ball from ever being put into play.
Precisely. Those are the only things they control directly.
But the traditional stats, ERA and hits given up, they all rely on balls being put into play.
And when McCracken analyzed the number of hits a pitcher gave up on balls put in play, a stat now known as BABI, batting average on balls in play, he found there was virtually no correlation from one year to the next.
It was just random luck?
Essentially, yes.
That feels so counterintuitive. Why can't a pitcher control where the ball goes once it's hit?
Well, the forces influencing a ball in play, the defense, the velocity of the hit, the weather, just pure random placement on the field, they're almost entirely out of the pitcher's control. A good pitcher might induce more ground balls, but even that doesn't guarantee a low BABIP year after year.
So a pitcher with a really low ERA one year, it was probably due to temporary, fluky good luck. His defense was making great plays, or the batted balls just happened to find a glove.
And the rich teams were paying millions based on this temporary fluky success. They were effectively buying luck. They were consistently misvaluing pitchers whose ERA was due for a massive correction the next year.
And the baseball establishment just dismissed him.
Completely. It contradicted the institutionalized knowledge of every ex-player and scout. And you can see why. Why would an owner believe some unemployed former paralegal over a former all-star shortstop?
But the A's recognized that lack of institutional belief as a powerful market defect.
And the perfect example of this is the reliever Chad Bradford.
Bradford was a prime example of the defective pitcher.
He was an underhand sidearm reliever who threw only between 81 and 84 miles per hour. Hardly intimidating. The White Sox brass didn't trust his stats. They thought his success was fluky, and they sent him down to AAA because he didn't look like a big leaguer.
So his very appearance, his unusual delivery, was his market defect.
That was it. The fact that he was so unconventional meant that traditional baseball minds just dismissed his objective value, which lay in his strikeout and walk rates. Paul DePodesta freely admitted it. He said, because of the way he looked, we thought he might be available to us.
If he had thrown 94 miles an hour with those exact same excellent stats, there's no way they get him.
No chance. The White Sox never would have traded him. His success was rooted in deception and his control numbers, not velocity or aesthetics.
So by applying this analytical lens to both hitting and pitching, the A's had perfected their machine.
And the results were stunning. By 2002, they'd fully implemented this data-driven model. The goal was simple: get to the playoffs.
And they did far more than that. They won 103 games in 2002. And what really stands out to me are the final standings in the American League West that year.
It was just poetic justice. The standings finished in the inverse order of their payrolls.
The team that spent the least won the division.
The team that spent the second least came in second, and so on, all the way down. It proved definitively that superior management and intelligence could triumph over massive financial disparity during the long regular season.
That is the zenith of the Moneyball model. But then we hit the postseason paradox. If the analytical model is so perfectly rational, why did the A's consistently struggle once they got to the short playoff series?
Because, as Lewis writes, baseball is structured to mock reason at the end. The rational, data-driven approach falters precisely because short postseason series are dominated by variance and small sample sizes.
This is a crucial intellectual point. Explain that ratio of luck to skill.
Sabermetricians like Pete Palmer quantified this. They calculated that the average difference in a baseball game due to skill, the actual talent gap between two teams, is only about 1 run per game.
Okay, 1 run.
But the average difference due to luck or randomness is about 4 runs a game.
So the average game is 4 parts luck and only 1 part skill.
On any given day, yes. Over 162 games, the luck evens out, and the skill advantage of the better team, like the A's, shines through. That's how they win 103 games. But in a short series, 3 out of 5.
That 4 runs of sheer randomness can easily overwhelm the 1 run of skill.
Exactly. Anything can happen, and the better team often loses. The randomness just overwhelms the skill advantage.
This explains Billy Beane's famous quote about the playoffs, which always seems so detached.
His detachment was rooted in that statistical reality. He understood that once the playoffs started, his job was largely over. He famously said, "My shit doesn't work in the playoffs. My job is to get us to the playoffs. What happens after that is fucking luck."
He'd maximize the regular season outcome. The rest was out of his control.
Yep.
Yet the media, personified by analysts like Joe Morgan, just kept criticizing the A's philosophy for the playoff losses, claiming the system itself was flawed because they failed to manufacture runs.
Morgan, the Hall of Fame second baseman, he spoke for the entire traditional baseball establishment. He kept arguing the A's were flawed because they didn't bunt or steal. He embodied that atavistic need to run, even when the data proved it was counterproductive. He wanted action, not walks.
But Paul DePodesta, he crunched the numbers right after they were eliminated, and his findings just demolished that media critique.
Completely. The media claimed their offense failed. DePodesta found the opposite. The A's actually scored more runs per game in the playoffs than they did during the regular season.
The offensive philosophy worked perfectly.
Flawlessly. The problem was pure statistical bad luck on the pitching side. They allowed way more runs per game in the playoffs than their season average, largely because one of their ace pitchers had 2 horrendous, unpredictable outings where his BABIP just spiked wildly.
And the ultimate irony here, is that the A's success eventually created an inefficiency in the front office market itself, as other teams tried to copy the model.
That's the final twist. The A's proved that superior data-driven management could be had cheaply, and suddenly the market for analytical talent exploded. John Henry, the new Red Sox owner, he immediately hired Bill James and even Boros McCracken. They were buying the intellectual capital that Oakland had developed.
And when Henry tried to hire Billy Beane away to run the Red Sox, offering him the largest salary ever for a GM, the analytical strategy came full circle.
It did. Paul DePodesta, who was going to be the new A's GM if Beane left, he negotiated the compensation for his boss. And he requested one player, Kevin Youkilis.
Why Youkilis?
Youkilis was the player Beane most coveted but could never get because of those old scouting biases. Scouts had dismissed Youkilis as a fat double-A third baseman because of how he looked.
But he was the objective, ultimate validation of the whole method.
He was. Kevin Youkilis was famously known as the Greek god of walks. At the time, he had the highest on-base percentage in all of professional baseball, second only to the untouchable Barry Bonds. He was the objective proof that value was hidden in the stats regardless of a player's physical appearance. That negotiation, focused purely on OBP, it cemented the victory of data over instinct.
That brings our entire deep dive to a close. The central lesson is just so powerful. The success of the A's proves that superior management and intelligence, when applied ruthlessly to flawed conventional wisdom, can overcome massive financial hurdles.
The greatest inefficiency in baseball was never the lack of money for poor teams. It was the inefficient deployment of money by the rich ones.
And that leads us to the provocative thought for you to consider today. The luxury of ignoring efficient methods is often a failure of the imagination. The players most undervalued by the market were those with easily visible defects, speed, size, appearance.
So think about that in your own career or industry. If you're managing a team or making investment decisions, are you letting cosmetic biases, the equivalent of saying a player has titties or looks soft, mask superior objective value? The greatest advantage is often found in the person or the asset that the rest of the world has already discounted for all the wrong reasons.
Thank you for watching. Please like, share, subscribe, and we'll follow up in the next topic. Welcome back to The Deep Dive, the place where we skip the endless scrolling, we zoom past the noise, and get straight to the essential knowledge nuggets hiding in plain sight.
And today, we are taking on a really sacred cow of professional sports.
The idea that money always wins.
Exactly. And that concept was just annihilated in the early 2000s by one team that fundamentally, and I mean fundamentally, changed Major League Baseball.
We are talking, of course, about the Oakland Athletics.
The team that masterminded the revolution we just call Moneyball. And the central mystery, the thing that sparked this entire deep dive, is a really astonishing question.
How did one of the absolute poorest teams in baseball consistently win against these, vastly richer opponents?
And that word poor doesn't even do it justice. You have to understand the scale of the financial challenge we're talking about here.
Right. If you look back specifically to the 2002 season, the financial gulf between the elite franchises and the Oakland A's was obscene.
Truly. The New York Yankees, the richest team in the sport, had a payroll clocking in at $126 million.
$126 million. And where were the A's?
If you looked at the bottom of the league, you had the Oakland A's and also the Tampa Bay Devil Rays operating with payrolls of less than $40 million.
So wait, less than a third.
Less than a third. The Yankees had roughly 3.5 times the raw financial capacity of the A's. I mean, to put that in business terms, it's the difference between a global tech giant and a medium-sized regional startup.
So the consensus across the sport at the time wasn't just that the A's would struggle.
No, it was that the game had stopped being an athletic competition at all. It had become purely financial. The team with the biggest checkbook wins. End of story.
And that's exactly the belief the A's proved catastrophically wrong.
And the core insight, the thing revealed in our source material, is that success hinges less on how much money you have and much more on how intelligently you spend it.
This isn't just a theory, though. There's quantifiable proof of this, right? From a financial expert named Doug Pappas.
Yes. Pappas devised this brilliant metric to measure financial efficiency. He calculated how many marginal dollars a team paid for each marginal win over the expected minimum.
What's the minimum?
He calculated it to be 49 wins for a team composed entirely of minimum wage players. So every win above 49 costs something. The question is, How much?
And when you look at that data, the results are, they're genuinely shocking.
Over a critical 3-year span, the Oakland A's were paying approximately $500,000, so $500,000 per win above that minimum threshold.
They were buying wins on a budget incredibly efficiently.
Incredibly. Now compare that to what the sources call the profligate-rich franchises.
Teams like the Baltimore Orioles or the Texas Rangers.
Right. They were spending nearly $3 million per win.
Wait, $3 million versus $500,000. That's 6 times as much.
600% for the exact same measurable output, a win.
You have to stop there and just ask how. How, in a hyper-competitive billion-dollar industry like Major League Baseball, could one competitor be 6 times more efficient than another? How could an inefficiency that massive just be allowed to exist?
It existed because of systemic thinking, because of, a reliance on gut feeling, on appearance, and on decades of ingrained subjective conventional wisdom.
These other teams were failing to ask the most important question.
Are we valuing the right things?
Which really establishes our mission for this deep dive. This disparity wasn't luck.
No, it was pure organizational strategy. So we are going to unpack how General Manager Billy Beane and his team fundamentally changed the way they valued players, how they ran their front office, and in doing so, revolutionized the way you buy wins in baseball.
To understand this radical strategy, you first have to understand the architect. We have to start with Billy Beane's personal trauma. Because that failure he had as a player is really the intellectual root of his later radicalism as a GM. He wasn't just a failed player, he's supposed to be a can't-miss prospect.
Oh, absolutely. The sources describe his physical package as, perfect, a great body, what scouts called, plus tools. He even scored higher than any other prospect on the psychological test that Major League Baseball administered at the time.
So everyone thought he was the next big thing.
He was viewed as a generational talent, often compared to Darryl Strawberry. In fact, the scout who ultimately drafted him for the Mets believed he was a better prospect than Strawberry.
But the reality was a complete and total collapse. He hit only .220 in the minor leagues.
The sources describe him almost poetically. He was an uncoiled spring, a firecracker that had failed to explode.
And the failure wasn't about raw talent. So what was it?
It was all mental. He struggled intensely with fear, with perfectionism, a crippling anxiety inside the batter's box. You see, baseball is a game defined by failure, and Beane just couldn't cope with the embarrassment of striking out.
So that fear actually made him change how he played.
It completely changed his physical mechanics. To reduce his high strikeout rate, he literally shortened his swing, just trying to make contact to avoid the shame of a whiff.
But in shortening his swing, he basically crippled his own natural power.
Exactly. He was hitting like a much smaller man trying to just poke the ball, rather than a top prospect maximizing his incredible athletic gifts.
So the psychological tragedy here is that after 8 years in Pro Bowl, he was a weaker, less effective hitter than he was at 17.
All because the fear of not living up to those traditional expectations just crushed his potential. His career stats tell the whole story. A dismal .219 average with only 11 walks against 80 strikeouts. That's the stat line of a player hitting with deep anxiety.
And this internal chaos, it led him to make a profoundly unconventional decision, one that few people in baseball could even begin to comprehend.
Beane quit playing. He quit entirely to take a desk job as an advanced scout.
And his general manager at the time, Sandy Alderson, was just baffled by this.
Completely perplexed. I mean, people retire because of injury, but Beane chose to walk away from the field and into the front office. Alderson said no one in baseball ever says, "I quit as a player, I want to be an advanced scout."
It proved he truly didn't want to play ball, at least not under the traditional constraints.
And that personal failure gave him this crucial perspective. He understood exactly where the traditional system was flawed, because he was personally failed by the very subjectivism of scouting that emphasized looks and projection over psychological reality.
But the intellectual groundwork for this big change had actually already been laid, starting with that GM, Sandy Alderson.
Right. Alderson was a former Marine Corps officer, and he ran the organization with this necessary sort of military-like rigor and focus on efficiency.
Especially after the team was sold in 1995 to owners who demanded it be run like a tight business.
This pressure was just massive. Alderson realized they could never compete with the Yankees' budget by signing 5-tool superstars. He had to be surgical.
And he famously asked the question that defined their entire early philosophy.
We can only afford a one-tool player. Which tool is it going to be?
And his answer came through quantitative analysis, specifically a pamphlet he commissioned from a guy named Eric Walker.
who came from an aerospace engineering background, not baseball. And Walker's analysis was ruthless. He argued that fielding the defense was at most 5% of the game.
Wait, hold on. 5%? That sounds like absolute heresy to a traditional baseball man.
What is?
Why would the sources conclude that fielding, which everyone thinks is critical, only accounts for 5% of success?
They justified it by focusing on the inputs that matter most, offense and pitching. The source material noted that good pitchers are usually valued properly, good batters often are not.
So fielding, while it looks impressive, contributes less to the final score than just preventing runs and generating them.
Exactly. If you're budget constrained, you have to focus your minimal resources on the highest yield areas. For them, that was hitting and pitching.
And this realization brings us to the most critical number, the one that redefined the A's entire offensive philosophy, on-base percentage, OBP.
Walker's insight defining OBP is so elegant and essential. He argued that the most critical number in all of baseball is 3.
3 outs.
The 3 outs that define an inning. The goal of any offense is simply to avoid making an out. Therefore, OBP is precisely the probability that the batter will not make an out.
It's the probability of not ending the inning. It's that simple.
It's that simple. And when you frame it that way, OBP, the ability to get on base, whether by a walk, a hit, or getting hit by a pitch, immediately clarifies itself as the single most important isolated offensive statistic.
So a player who walks is almost as valuable as a player who hits a single.
Because the outcome is the same? The probability of an out has been nullified for that at-bat.
And the moment of revelation for Billy Beane came when Alderson finally pointed him toward the source of all this analytical thinking, Bill James.
And Beane, a traditional baseball man through and through, had never even heard of James. This statistical pioneer, whose self-published abstracts had been challenging baseball's conventional wisdom for years from his basement.
Beane realized that everything Sandy Alderson was talking about, this whole elegant mathematical system,
was derivative of Bill James's work. The statistics weren't based on how a player looked or how fast he ran. They were based on observable, predictable efficiency.
For Beane, this wasn't just a new strategy. It was an escape hatch.
It was. It led him away from the subjective, fear-driven baseball culture that had crushed his playing career and into this green field of objective, quantitative analysis. He finally had the statistical weapons to fight back against the false ideas of success that had defined his youth.
So once those intellectual roots were established, they needed the engine, the person who could translate these theories into actionable strategy.
And that person was Paul DePodesta, the head of research and development.
DePodesta was the epitome of this new, non-traditional thinking, a Harvard graduate with an honors degree in sociology. Crucially, his background was not in baseball.
No, it was in financial markets. He learned about valuation from former Wall Street traders who used derivative analysis.
And that Wall Street connection is absolutely central to understanding the rigor of what the A's were doing.
It's everything. These traders had made fortunes pricing derivative securities using extremely precise risk modeling. They developed something they called AVM systems, which aimed to extract the element of luck from outcomes.
What does that mean, extracting luck?
It means assigning an expected run value to every single tiny component of a baseball play. A traditional scout watches a play and says, "That was a great piece of hitting."
But a Wall Street analyst looks at it like a risk calculation.
Precisely. They are valuing past performance to minimize future risk. For instance, if a player gets a leadoff double, the expected run value of that inning might jump from, say, 0.55 runs to 1.1 runs.
So that double is worth exactly 0.55 runs.
Exactly. And conversely, a strikeout lowers the expected run value and costs the team a specific number of runs. This granular precision, calculating the cost of every out and the value of every base reached, minimized the chance they would overpay or undervalue a player based on emotion or just how he looked.
This quantitative approach must have created immediate, massive conflict with the old guard, the traditional scout.
Oh, the tension was immediate. And it was high stakes, especially leading up to the 2002 amateur draft. The old scouts even had a specific, derogatory catchphrase for what Beane and Paul were doing.
They called it performance scouting.
Which was an insult. Because the traditional scout relies on projection. They look at a raw 18-year-old body and project what he might become in 5 years, based on his tools, his build, his temperament.
So performance scouting meant you're just judging a player by what he's already done, his college stats, and ignoring the scout's special vision.
To the traditionalist, this was lazy. It was desk job evaluation that ignored the artistry and nuance of physical potential.
And the 2002 draft was the ultimate crucible for this conflict because the A's had 7 first-round picks.
Unprecedented draft capital. They got it as compensation for losing their star players. Jason Giambi, Johnny Damon, Jason Isringhausen.
Players who, combined, would make $33 million a year.
Which was almost the A's entire payroll. They absolutely had to hit on these picks.
And this is where that cultural clash got really intense. It's centered on this idea of makeup.
Right. The scouts were intensely focused on filtering out players based on temperament and personality.
And they used these specific derogatory terms. Rockhead, meaning a lack of intelligence, was sometimes forgiven. Soft was terrible.
But the ultimate death sentence was bad makeup.
What did that even mean?
Bad makeup signaled a host of expensive, unmanageable problems. Anything from jail time to chronic drinking to severe personality disorders. The rich teams, you see, they could afford the risk of a high-ceiling player with bad makeup.
They figure their enormous resources could fix the person.
Right. The A's could not afford that failure.
The organizational joke they use to visualize this screening process is fantastic. The filmisnow standard.
It perfectly illustrates the subjective intensity of this filter. Whenever a player was convicted of bad makeup in the draft room, they would pin a magnetic photo of a former assistant, Phil Milo, next to the player's name strip.
And Milo was apparently universally disliked within the organization.
The story goes that on the day Paul DePodesta was hired, Milo walked up to him, no greeting, and just immediately said, "I gotta be honest with you, I'm really not pleased we hired you."
So that was the standard. They weren't just filtering out criminals, they were filtering out actively annoying or toxic personalities.
And while that sounds absurd, from Beane and Paul's perspective, it was a cold, hard calculation of risk minimization. The poverty of the A's meant zero tolerance for high-risk personalities.
Beane summarized the cost of failure pretty plainly at one point.
Yeah, asking rhetorically, who's that fucking guy we took last year we had to release because he robbed a bank?
It was about avoiding catastrophic financial failure. Since they couldn't buy stars, they absolutely couldn't afford to waste their limited capital on players who were statistically great but personally unreliable.
So once they minimized those unmanageable risks, the bad makeup guys, their drafting strategy focused purely on the statistics that traditional scouting completely missed.
They shifted their entire hitter evaluation focus away from traditional tools and defensive positions
to pure hitting ability, prioritizing OBP above all else.
And this led to a radical rule: forget positions.
Which was complete heresy. Traditional baseball drafting is defined by position. A shortstop who can't field or a first baseman who can't hit for power is considered fundamentally broken.
But they prioritized the bat first. I mean, take the example of Mark Teahan, a third baseman.
Right. Scouts noted he didn't project because he was a corner guy, meaning a player who is expected to hit for significant power because they play a position where defense isn't as important.
And Teahan lacked that expected power.
But Billy Beane's response just cuts right to the core of the new philosophy. He challenges the entire assumption. He said, power is something that can be acquired. Good hitters develop power. Power hitters don't become good hitters.
They prioritize the underlying skill, the ability to hit and draw walks over the visual projection of slugging.
The data showed that if a player had plate discipline and could get on base, power often followed later as they physically matured.
And this brings us to the most brilliant part of the A's strategy: exploiting the market inefficiency created purely by baseball's ingrained beliefs about appearance, about physical flaws.
If the entire sport uniformly rules out an entire class of people based on how they look, the A's could just buy them cheaply. This was the luxury the rich teams denied themselves. It was a failure of imagination that insisted players must look like athletes.
Let's go through those incredible case studies, starting with Jeremy Brown. He was drafted with the 35th pick.
Brown was an incredibly productive college catcher. The A's loved his statistics, but his body was deemed unsuited to the game by every other organization.
Because he was overweight.
That's it. Because he was universally overlooked due to his physical appearance, the A's were able to draft him and sign him for just $200,000.
Which is about $500,000 less than a comparable player at that draft spot would have typically demanded.
The defect creates the discount. It's that simple.
Then there was Brant Colamarino, drafted in the 7th round.
Paul DePodesta called him possibly the best hitter in the country.
So why was the best hitter in the country available in the 7th round?
Again, appearance. Paul recalled the organizational joke after Colomarino took his shirt off. Coaches informed Billy that Colomarino has titties.
And Paul DePodesta found pure joy in this kind of inefficiency.
It was his core philosophy. He said, I get excited about a guy when he has something about him that causes everyone else to overlook him, and I know that it is something that just doesn't matter. His weight was statistically irrelevant to his ability to hit and draw walks.
And they even applied this logic to high-value defensive positions. John McCurdy, drafted 24th overall, was a shortstop.
A position demanding elite fielding. But he was deemed an ugly-looking fielder with a known defensive flaw.
But he also had the highest slugging percentage in the country.
So the A's plan was already in place before they even drafted him. They decided they would just move him to second base, a position where the defensive demands are slightly less stringent.
They prioritized the exceptional bat, knowing they could minimize the defensive flaw through positioning.
And they were anticipating he might be the next Jeff Kent, another powerful hitting infielder who had to move off shortstop due to defensive limitations.
This quantitative rigor also extended into what is notoriously the most difficult process in baseball: pitcher acquisition.
Yeah, and this was heavily influenced by an amateur analyst named Voros McCracken.
McCracken made a truly radical discovery, didn't he? One that challenged decades of pitching evaluation.
Absolutely. Traditional scouting looked for pitchability, the supposed ability of a pitcher to prevent hits even when the ball was put into play.
McCracken analyzed the data and observed that year to year, the only repeatable skills for a pitcher were walks, strikeouts, and home runs allowed.
And the really crucial finding was about hits per balls in play.
Right. McCracken found that the number of hits a pitcher gives up on balls put in play, often called BABIP, had virtually no correlation year to year for any pitcher, regardless of talent level.
So you're saying if a pitcher only gave up a few hits on balls put in play one year, that was just luck, not skill?
That's exactly what the data showed. Whether a ball hit into play became a hit or an out was overwhelmingly controlled by the defensive players behind the pitcher, or by sheer random variation, not the pitcher's innate ability. This is a huge realization for a low-budget team. It means if you pay a premium for a pitcher who is supposedly great at preventing hits on balls in play,
you were simply paying for last year's luck.
So the A's strategy, informed by this data, was twofold.
First, Paul viewed hitters as a much better, less risky bet than pitchers, so they should draft pitchers in bulk, lower down in the draft.
And when they did draft them,
they focused exclusively on pitchers who could prevent balls from being put into play in the first place, guys who generated high strikeout and low walk rates. They refused to pay for the supposed ability to prevent hits, dismissing that skill as a statistical illusion. And this saved them enormous draft capital.
The ultimate stress test for this entire system came in 2002. Immediately after they lost their most efficient offensive machine, Jason Giambi.
He left for a $120 million contract with the Yankees. This was a true organizational crisis.
It was the moment traditionalists expected the A's system to just completely collapse.
Giambi was a phenomenal hitter, known for his ability to control the strike zone and get on base. Billy Beane knew he couldn't replace the individual superstar, so his strategy was clear.
Recreate the aggregate.
Exactly. Recreate the aggregate offense using multiple, cheap, defective parts.
They needed to buy the pieces of Giambi they couldn't afford to be without. And they did this by acquiring 3 players most teams avoided because of perceived defects.
First, they brought in David Justice, a veteran hitter past his prime, but he was highly disciplined, understood the strike zone, and was committed to working the count. A pure OBP guy.
Second, Jeremy Giambi, Jason's younger brother.
Jeremy was the ultimate defensive liability, described as the slowest man on the team and gloriously inept in left field.
But they put him there anyway.
Because the most efficient use of resources was utilizing his phenomenal OBP ability, which was statistically excellent, they were willing to sacrifice his defense entirely because that flaw created the cost discount they needed.
And then the most famous acquisition in this group, Scott Hatteberg.
A catcher whose career was supposedly ruined. He suffered a nerve injury that crippled his ability to throw, which basically ended his defensive utility.
The Rockies had him and just let him go. Right.
They granted him free agency, deeming his $1.5 million arbitration price 3 times what he was worth. But the A's saw him solely for his intellectual approach to hitting. High OBP, drawing walks, wearing out opposing pitching.
So they moved him to first base, where his throwing defect was minimized.
And they captured all that offensive value on the cheap.
These 3 acquisitions just proved the core thesis. The A's were willing to take on players with severe flaws because those flaws drove down the price. The players were defective, but their defects didn't interfere with the one statistical output that mattered most:
getting on base. And this same logic applied to their bullpen additions, most notably Chad Bradford, the submarine pitcher.
Bradford threw underhand at a low velocity of 81 to 84 mph. He just didn't look like a big leaguer.
And the White Sox, who treated him, didn't trust his excellent statistics. They viewed him as a trickster or a AAA guy whose success had to be temporary.
But Paul DePodesta's insight was pure quantitative arbitrage.
Bradford's stats were excellent, and because of his funny look and low velocity, he was universally undervalued. Paul noted that if Bradford had identical strikeout and walk rates but threw 94 mph overhand, he would be completely unaffordable.
So his lack of conventional appearance created the precise cost discount the A's needed.
And it's fascinating that despite the A's faith in his numbers, Bradford himself had this profound lack of self-confidence. He was constantly thinking, how much longer can I keep fooling him?
Which shows the persistent cultural pressure that even the successful players felt.
This systemic exploitation of inefficiency extended beyond drafting. Billy Beane became a master of exploiting the in-season trade market, hunting for what he called the fucking A trade.
And the timing was everything.
As poor teams lost hope by midsummer, they started dumping players to cut costs and lower their payroll. That caused prices for mid-level talent to fall dramatically.
And that was Billy's prime window to acquire players he couldn't afford earlier in the year.
A textbook example was the acquisition of Ricardo Rincon, the Cleveland Indians' premier left-handed setup man. Beane knew Cleveland was financially constrained, so he leveraged that by offering only a minor league second baseman.
And this really highlights Beane's manic rage-fueled negotiation style.
Oh, absolutely. At one point, to maximize his leverage, he casually leaked false information to baseball journalist Peter Gammons about Rincon being a done deal with another team, just to create urgency for the team he was actually targeting.
But the truly legendary negotiation involved the Montreal Expos GM Omar Minaya in a failed attempt to acquire Kevin Youkilis.
Beane wasn't targeting the Expos' star player, Cliff Floyd. He was targeting a minor leaguer from the Red Sox system, Youkilis. Beane knew the Red Sox wanted Floyd.
So Beane tried to use his leverage to tempt Minaya with his convoluted multi-team trade structure.
The goal was to convince Minaya to take more value from Boston for Floyd and then demand that the Red Sox include Youkilis in that package, a player the Red Sox were willing to give up.
Beane literally had to walk Minaya through the 3-team structure, step by step.
And Minaya was completely baffled. He just saw Youkilis as a fat Double-A third baseman. He couldn't understand why Beane, the GM of a division rival, was so obsessed with acquiring him.
But Beane knew.
Beane knew Youkilis was the Greek god of walks, a player with elite OBP skills that were undervalued everywhere except in Oakland. It just highlights how much Beane valued the knowledge of the system over the perception of the players.
Beane's reliance on objective data, though, meant he had to enforce absolute organizational control, and that operated entirely against baseball tradition.
Which led to immense internal friction, especially with his field manager, Art Howe.
Howe was famously left entirely in the dark on personnel decisions. Beane dictated everything from the roster to, crucially, on-field strategy.
He even directed Howe on how to use his bullpen, instructing him to think of Chad Bradford, the submarine pitcher, as the closer before the 9th inning, dictating the exact situations he was to be used in.
And the anti-bunting strategy was the most pervasive part of this top-down control.
Right. Bunting is the ultimate traditional sacrifice, giving up an out to advance a runner. But since OBP is all about avoiding outs, bunting is statistically catastrophic unless the situation is perfect.
The anecdote that best illustrates this total control involves a spare outfielder, Adam Pitt.
Oh, it's perfect. Pitt executed what looked like a standard sacrifice bunt in a tight game. Art Howe immediately wanders over to him in the dugout and asks, in this quiet, leading tone,
You did that on your own, right?
That exchange is phenomenal. It wasn't an accusation of poor strategy. It was an assumption of defiance.
Bunting, a fundamental baseball play, was assumed to be an act that ran counter to the entire front office ideology.
Howe was basically asking, did you intentionally go against our entire organizational philosophy just now? That's how complete the analytical takeover was.
The friction also came from the outside, though. The media, the traditional baseball voices, they constantly criticized the A's for not bunting or stealing.
What Billy Beane derisively called the atavistic need to run.
This critique really peaked during their 2002 playoff run.
Yeah, Hall of Fame second baseman Joe Morgan continually insisted the A's needed to manufacture runs by bunting and stealing. He believed their high OBP, patient style was ill-suited for a short playoff series.
But Paul DePodesta immediately crunched the numbers after their playoff loss.
And he found the A's scored 4.9 runs per game during the 162-game regular season. But in the playoffs, they actually scored more runs per game, 5.5 runs, in the 5-game series against the Twins.
So Morgan's critique was entirely backward.
Completely. They weren't scoring less. They were simply allowing too many runs due to poor starting pitching in a very small sample size. The offense, built on OBP, was working perfectly. Luck just overwhelmed the outcome.
And this ties into the larger statistical truth about the structure of the game, first calculated by the sabermetrician Pete Palmer.
Palmer calculated that the average difference in baseball due to skill is about 1 run a game. The difference due to pure luck is about 4 runs a game.
So the long 162-game season rewards skill because it allows the luck to even out over time.
But the playoffs, being short series, are where chance overwhelms the skill advantage. This is why Billy Beane, accepting that statistical reality, remains surprisingly calm.
He famously said, "My shit doesn't work in the playoffs. My job is to get us to the playoffs.
Yep.
What happens after that is fucking luck."
The A's proved they were the better, more efficient team over the long haul. They won 103 games in 2002, despite losing all their stars. But that temporary financial advantage, that market inefficiency, it could never last.
Once the knowledge was public, the market rapidly began to adapt and catch up.
The moment the A's success became undeniable, the system began to replicate itself immediately. J.P. Ricciardi, the A's director of player development, became the GM for the Blue Jays.
And his first acts.
Firing 25 scouts and hiring Keith Law, a writer from baseballprospectus.com, specifically because Beane had told him that to find the market inefficiencies, he needed his own Paul.
The ultimate confirmation, though, came from the Boston Red Sox.
John Henry, who made his fortune using statistical analysis and finance, purchased the team. And Henry instantly hired Bill James himself, the intellectual forefather of the A's system, as senior consultant baseball operations.
He even hired Voros McCracken as a special advisor on pitching.
The very people who had provided the low-cost analytical advantage to the A's were now being hired away by the wealthiest organizations. This proved that the core efficiency the A's found undervalued players wasn't sustainable just for Oakland.
The richer teams could and would adopt the philosophy, paying top dollar for both the analytical talent and the statistically undervalued players.
The greatest remaining inefficiency, ironically, was the low price of analytical talent itself, which was quickly corrected.
This all culminated in Billy Beane being offered the job to run the Red Sox. A massive, life-changing payday.
He famously struggled to accept. Paul DePodesta was set to become the A's new GM, and they were already negotiating the compensation package that Boston would have to pay Oakland for releasing Beane from his contract.
And the irony is just perfect. Paul and Billy argued back and forth until they finally settled on the player Paul would demand in exchange for Beane's freedom.
Kevin Youkilis,
Greek god of walks. The very player Beane had failed to acquire earlier through that manic 3-team trade structure.
He was the prize they demanded for the knowledge system itself. It showed that the philosophy, the knowledge, the valuation system, it would all continue, regardless of which individual was sitting in the general manager's chair.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener? The Oakland A's Moneyball revolution was really the ultimate proof of concept.
It proved that superior management, rooted in challenging conventional wisdom and applying cold, hard intelligence from data, could absolutely run circles around raw wealth, at least for a while.
They systematically proved that baseball, a field so reliant on ingrained beliefs and subjective traditions, things like 5-tool scouting, the importance of appearance, the need to manufacture runs, was operating with these immense, unnecessary market inefficiencies.
They focused on players whose visible flaws, a funny pitching motion, an overweight body, a reputation for slowness, an inability to throw, made them cheap, even if their core statistical output, particularly OBP, was elite.
But that success was fleeting, precisely because the system was so logical and so effective.
Once richer teams understood the methodology, they just deployed their superior financial resources to hire the analytical talent and pay the undervalued players what they were truly worth. The field of ignorance that the A's exploited was quickly harvested by the competition.
So the question for you, the learner, is whether any industry that relies heavily on tradition and subjective judgment, whether it's supply chain management, legal strategy, or the very field you operate in, can ever truly maintain a substantial field of ignorance once the numbers start to speak.
If cold data can dismantle decades of scouting wisdom overnight, what deeply held beliefs in your profession are just waiting to be challenged by intelligence applied ruthlessly and efficiently?